Albert, we're now up to 11 participants.
Yeah, 12.
Yes.
Okay, and it is live now. So I can close down the live windows to let the software run in the background. Okay, today we are going to have a discussion about the video we saw earlier. That is about the Laos plateaus greening. So, any issues like to raise, anybody?
Who was the president of China at the time, Albert?
At that time is should be Wu Jintao, the one before, because
Sorry,
they started the project in around 2008, I think.
2009.
2009. So is the last president, Wu
Oh,
Jintao.
sorry, I think we were talking about this Saihanba reforestation.
No, we're talking about the video which we want to discuss last time. But you want to talk about Saihanba, that's fine as well. Both, no problem.
No, I didn't get a link or any email from you. I was maybe I was misunderstood.
Oh,
but
yes. By the way, because the email I sent out only to the Lunar Wedding group. Oh, now those who are not coming from Lunar Wedding, can you guys send me an email, say giving, so that I can make up a list to send you anything? Is that okay? Because
yes, that's fine.
okay,
What's your
now
email?
what is my email address? Okay, my email address is let put it this way. You get your pen ready. I'm not going to tell the rest of the world my email address because I'm live at the moment. So at the end, I will stop that live and then I will get my email address to everybody. Would that be okay?
Okay.
Yeah. I just remember I'm live at the moment, so I'm a bit hesitant to give my email to to everybody through YouTube.
Okay.
But anyway, I will give you the email at the end. But just remind me in case I forgot.
Okay.
Okay.
Albert, I did get the link and I did see the video.
Yep.
And perhaps if I start the conversation.
Good.
When I first looked at it, I thought this is hope in a changing climate we're talking about.
Yep.
And I thought it was only going to be about China, but it was interesting to see the parallels in Ethiopia, Rwanda, Israel, etc.
Yep.
Now, I did send you a couple of photos, Albert, of trees, both eucalypts and olive trees, which are the two main trees which are being planted in Israel. But I did a bit of Googling and it's interesting, the area in China that we're talking about is 36,000 square kilometres. Now, as a comparison, Tasmania is only 68,401 square kilometres. So the area we're talking about is more than half the size of Tasmania. That's a huge area.
Yep.
And to compare it with Israel, the 36,000 square kilometres within China, and Israel is only 22,145 square kilometres.
For the whole Israel.
The whole of Israel, that's right.
It's larger than Israel.
Yeah, 1.5 times the size of Israel. Over 1.5 times the size of Israel.
So you can understand the effort there is actually a very large effort. And because of that, so the lesson I learned from that one is we need to get the people there involved. I think that is the most important thing. If it's only the government effort or a team's effort, I don't think it will work. it must get the local people involved in order to make it work and to make it last. That's one of the lessons I learned from that video. How to engage with the local people, motivate them, and convince them that this is something better than what was before. Give them a hope in the future.
Of course, we don't know how much of that video is propaganda, but it certainly gives you the impression that people are involved.
Well, if people are not involved, you won't last, because as soon as your work team working your team leave, then people will revert to their original lifestyle, and then revert everything back. So the key concept here, you must engage locals so that they are committed to the change in order for it to last. So I think Chinese people understand that. So yeah, I'm also skeptical at the very beginning, looking at it's coming from China. It probably is propaganda. But just remember, John D. Liu, the photographer, is an American journalist. He is brought up. He has Chinese ethnic ethnicity, but he was brought up in America, and he came to China as an assignment from his stations to do the photography. He is a cameraman. But as he get involved, he started to, and then later on he do a study himself and becomes a environmental ecologist. Any other comments from anybody?
Well, I watched a short video with the interviewer speaking with people receiving I think it was an Environmental Championships award a couple of years ago, which was very good. And she was making the point about, which is one of the ones that you commented on in one of our earlier lectures, Albert. The focus of the government was number one task is to feed the people, and she was wondering, well, you know, how do we balance how does China balance the priorities of feeding the people and taking up land for, you know, a great big forest versus how is that sort of balanced rather than making it into arable land? Has anyone got any sort of thoughts on that? The people that I didn't really understand what their response was to that. I think it was, we have to start somewhere or something like that. But,
well, now going back to the Laos Plateau, the Laos Plateau is called Laos Plateau because its soil is Laos. Laos is a very loose soil, and over the years, of overgrazing and overuse the land, so it becomes barren. By the time the Chinese government recognized they need to do something, the land is already very barren. So the people there was very poor. They are living on about $100 per year. So very, very poor. So when the Chinese government comes in, they promise them that we will help you to have a better life by preserving the land. So what they do is actually divide the plateau into 3 regions. The top, they call it the head. At the top, plant trees. The middle, you create what's that called? Terraces. And then the terraces you created is yours. So you put in the effort, create a bit of land, and that bit of land becomes yours to plant on. And then at the lower end of the plateau, where the valleys is, they put in a very shallow dam. The dam is about 1 meter or 2 meters high, so it's not a very deep dam. So during the years when the rainfall, before all the plantations get whole, there are still loughs being washed down, and these dams trap all these loughs and created farmland, fat farmland, right at the valley. And then next to the valley, they dig up channels to let the water flow, and therefore it becomes a microclimate. The microclimate is like that. The top is trees. The trees, when there's rainfall on it, the trees now holds the water, and therefore the water slowly slip down through the hills. As it slips down, it is passed into different fields in the torrents, and then eventually fall to the bottom of valleys, and then let go through the valleys. But at the same time, they built some land on the valley, very flat, because as they put in the dams, they level up the top, and therefore all the loughs coming down is trapped by the dam and becomes a flat land. And they build greenhouses on that for high value crops. So the people's life actually improved. If I remember correctly, the video talked about the people's income increased about 10 or 20 times from the beginning to end. And by increasing their income, they obviously understand, this worked for me, and that they will keep on keeping the system instead of going up to the top of the mountain to chop all the trees. What everybody is afraid of is when the people left, when the government left, the people will go back to the old life and then come to the top of the tree of the hill and chop down all the trees and get all the woods to use. Because the main idea is the hilltop there is the reservoir. When the rain falls, the trees will absorb all this water and then let it slowly slip down. So the whole concept is basically a very simple concept. Is try to slow down the water. The slower the water flows through your land, the more fertile your land becomes. So this similar concept can be applied to almost everywhere. I think going back to Middle East, I think I saw a documentary by, I can't remember the name now, doing the same thing. Middle East, a lot of Middle East is very dry. Israel, because it's so dry, it developed the so-called drip agriculture. So there you have a pipe, and then there's a little thing to drip the water down to the roots of the plant in order to get them to grow. So that's one method. Again, using as little water as possible, feeding the water to right it is. Another way is to actually build dams on contour. That means on the same height. You put dams there, so that when the water flows through, it will be held by the dams. But the dam is not very deep, just let's say 30 meters, 30 cm, 60 cm, very narrow dams. But the water will be trapped on the contour, and then will flow down another contour and slowly pass through. And that's the only thing we need to do to stop the water flow and revitalize the land. That's quite an interesting concept.
It's surprising that we haven't started doing that sort of thing on a bigger scale in Australia.
I think so. I think Australia should start something like that as well, because Australia is one of those permaculture. The two founders of permaculture come from Australia. That's their concept. Their concept is, well, we try to slow the water in the land. As long as the land get water, then you will recoup itself. So quite interesting, quite simple actually.
I guess we need some water to start with, though.
I see some good news coming. You know, the oil price these days go to negative. But obviously we can't use fossil fuels for that. But one of the interesting I think is that when energy is cheap, converting salt water into fresh water is not that difficult.
Oh, but if I can get back to what you were saying earlier about the Middle East, as far as we can tell, Israel was much more fertile in the biblical era than it is now.
Yep.
And it was through neglect, particularly during the centuries that the Ottomans controlled the area, that neglect in that era led to the desert areas, which of course is what the present Israeli government is planning to get rid of.
I think one of the interesting we need to understand is that it is better for us human to work with nature than work against nature.
Absolutely.
So that again, this come back to the agricultural system. For the last 100 years at least, the world has switched to an industrial agricultural system, whereby a very large piece of land, hundreds hectares or even more, plant only a single crop, monocrop, and use chemical fertilizers to fertilize the land. But at the end, the land becomes less fertile instead of becoming more fertile, because some of the chemical fertilizer is not fully balanced. There are some, for example, sodium, etc., which is not absorbed. We don't need that much sodium in the land. But sodium is a very good radical to couple with the other elements in order to supply to the land. Sodium, urea, for example. So as you keep on giving them with sodium, urea, the urea is being used up, but the sodium is left behind, and the land becomes less and less fertile because of this. So you have to keep on adding more fertilizer, and the land becomes even harder. And so there is now a movement to revert back to organic farming. There are two things about organic farming. A lot of people argue, in organic farming you don't have sufficient fertilizer, and therefore the plant, the productivity will not be as high. But it all depends on what you want to do. Yes, I saw a very interesting documentary not too long ago. Asparagus. Is that little long vegetable? Is that called asparagus?
Asparagus.
Asparagus. Okay.
Asparagus.
Okay, asparagus. Now we eat only a short part of it, but a lot of other plant material is not consumed. So these farms produce a lot of farm waste, because we eat only a short section, but the plant itself is much bigger. So what do you do? Well, one method is that you actually, after harvesting, you remove the whole plant, chop the plant up into small pieces, and feed it to the sheep. It turns out the sheep like it very much. And then you use the sheep's dung, their excretion, as fertilizer for your asparagus. So there's a complete circle. And the land will become even more fertile every time you add something onto it. So quite interesting.
Bye, Helen.
So we need to start thinking like this, is how we can live with the nature rather than against nature. If we are living with the nature, the life will be much better.
I wonder whether our the economics of your large-scale farming, like you were talking about, would make it just unprofitable for Australian farmers, at least, to be involved in much more labour-intensive organic fertilizing and organic practices.
I think it depends on the intelligence of your farming machinery. I will put it that way. With intelligence, for example, okay, my brain is going wild at the moment. Another issue here is we have a lot of land near the sea, which we cannot farm. But what if we can develop seawater agriculture? That means we have some plants which can cope with salt water, and then this plant will produce edible produce for us. In that case, then we will increase our arable land by a large margin. The earth has water. The only unfortunate thing is they are not fresh water. We have water, but we are lack of fresh water. So one way is to use energy to convert salt water into fresh water. That's one way. The other way is directly make use of salt water. Why don't we start planting in salt water? There are a lot of plants survive in salt water anyway. So is there a way to use some genetic engineering to convert some of the plants from living on fresh water back to living on salt water? If we can do that, then that will open up a lot of arable land. The third thing about organic farming is we need to put in a cycle. For example, the asparagus I talked about. Actually, it is a cooperation between the asparagus farmer and the sheep farmer. So there are actually two groups. They are intensive farming, but these two intensive farming is put very close together so that the waste product from one becomes the feed of the other, and the other's waste product becomes the feed of the other, and make it a circle. The asparagus, all this other plant material becomes a waste for the asparagus farmers, but it becomes an input for the sheep farmers. The manure coming from the sheep is a waste product of the sheep farming, but becomes an input for the asparagus. So we need to start thinking in that way. Then probably we can figure out a better system. Then it's still intensive farming on the other side, both of them, but they are close together and then they integrate with each other.
Albert?
Yep.
Cyril here.
Yep.
One of the old practices was back in time was crop rotation, and that saved the need to fertilise, because whatever particular crop takes out 1 year, 4 years later, it's restored and you can use that crop again.
Yeah.
That was a good tried method for older farmers way back, well before our time.
Yeah.
The other thing
that's mainly for subsistence farming. We don't really have that sort of thing in Western world now.
No, because we specialise, and that creates the need for putting urea or other fertiliser on the land. Albert, you're talking food. If you remember our banana shortage back a few years back, where they went through the roof because the crops got destroyed. What we found out, there was things being shown then that when we go to buy bananas in the supermarket, the supermarkets want to buy off the producers a set length. And if it's too big, that's the perfect banana, but it's just too big. They think it doesn't sell. Well, I'd buy them. You can always cut it in half or eat the whole lot. And so they go out for scrap. They get just pulverised, or they might go for pig food or whatever. And the
A little
same
bit of that goes to markets, the Victoria market, South Melbourne market, Paran market, etc., which is where I buy my vegetables, and you haven't got this problem of everything being the same size.
Yeah.
I
But
think
when you think about it, what a terrible waste it's been, you know, for the country,
ridiculous.
for mankind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then
Now,
It's absolutely
there's
stupid.
something else that we haven't looked at yet, and that is the sabbatical. In biblical days in Israel, you had 6 years where you planted crops, then you let the field go fallow for the 7th year, the sabbatical year, and let the soil renew itself before you put plants back again. Now, if you divided your farm into 7 areas, every year you would have 6 of those 7 areas with crops and 1 area without crops. But we've forgotten things like that.
yeah, and then with rotation, that 6 areas can have 6 different kinds of crops, still intensive, but 6 different kinds, and then you keep on rotating. So,
Can I ask, is anybody here from a farming background?
oh no.
No.
Well, I think we probably ought to speak with some experts before we get carried away on too many things, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and I am actually from a farming background, but I have to say I don't know very much about it. I sort of left that area, but a lot of the stuff we're talking about is much more attuned to the subsistence farming approaches of, well, centuries ago. And we are well beyond that. And so, yes, of course, we do need some sensible solutions for our situation today, but it might not be.
we need some experts to actually come in and understand the problem better to suggest a better solution. But there's another interesting thing. For what I can't remember the name first again. It's called the rotational grazing for dairy farmers. So what they are at the most of the farming at the moment is you have divide the paddock into several areas, and then the cow stay on one paddock for a extended time, and then move to the next one, and then let the land rejuvenate. But during that process, the cow stay on the same land for too long. All the grass has been almost eaten off, and there's not much chance for the grass to regrow. So there are now a movement sort of to move the cows through a paddock in much shorter time. They are talking about moving the cows every day. Moving the cows every day, giving the cow fresh grass to eat every day, and the grass, because of that, isn't eat up to the roots, and therefore after say 20 days or 40 days the grass can rejuvenate. So they rotate through a much smaller paddock but more intense. So they call it the intensive grazing method, something like that. Previously, that was not possible because you have to use method to limit the animals to move beyond your paddock. But these days, with electric fencing, which is quite light, they just need to have an electric wire. When the cow learn that you touch that wire, you get shocked, that it won't touch it again. So you basically use electric fencing as a mean to keep the animals in a smaller paddock, and then you keep on moving the cows between more paddocks. It seems to work quite well. I don't know. I think I'm not a farmer, so I just read it I saw it on YouTube about this type method.
I think one of the big changes that we need to make in our country is making sure that farming, that primary produce actually is sold at market, whether it's the Victoria market or supermarkets or our shops, at a price which is actually rewards the farmers for doing
The right thing.
more sustainable practices. The things that you're talking about just there, Albert, too, is all fine, but cows don't like to be moved around very often, especially not when they have calves. And in fact, you don't go near them when they've got calves or when they're expecting. So it would require a lot more intensive farm management. And when you look at to make a living, farms here in Australia have to be generally pretty big to support cattle and sheep grazing and so forth. Look at the Queensland sizes of properties, but you have to have people to manage all of that, and many farms it's just the farmer.
Mary, what you say is
the farmer's wife has got to work a second job to make ends meet. So anyway, sorry.
Sorry, Mary. Look, you raise an interesting point. I don't know whether many of you realise how supermarket prices are realised. It has got nothing to do with the farmers. They conduct surveys. Some of you might have participated in these surveys, and one of the questions that is asked is how much would you expect to pay for potatoes? How much would you expect to pay for cans of peas? And people's answer to their expectations is the main thing that sets the price in a supermarket. And the farmers have to fit in with what the supermarkets perceive their customers want.
I'm not at all surprised, actually, Albert. It would seem, though, that our expectations, because we're conditioned to paying $1 a litre for milk, that our expectation is, well, when you ask the question, how much would you expect to pay for milk? Oh, $1. That sounds a good idea, doesn't it? Oh, so I hear what you're saying, and I don't doubt what you're saying, but it seems kind of the wrong way around, doesn't it?
Look, it's not only the supermarkets. I know at one stage I was on the Australian Philatelic Council, and that is the way that Australia Post used to set the price of postage. It was people's expectations. Things have changed in the post office now because very few people use letters, but that was the way they used to work.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we have to get used to realising that there's a lot of people out there who can't make a living sensibly, and then have to do some of those. We've all seen on the newspapers in the 7:30 reports and so forth, where crops have got to be destroyed because the price to get them to market is too high to even warrant
harvesting.
Or as you said before, they're the wrong size.
Yes. I think some of the problem is that the supermarkets, because there's only few of them and they're so big, they wield the power.
Yeah.
And they determine the middleman. We wanted it, as you're saying, Albert, at this price, and if you don't deliver that, we're not buying off you. And they work the one against the other, and they drive a really hard bargain. And, well, it's good for the consumer, but the supermarkets still make a hefty profit. But, the litre of milk was unsustainable. It wasn't good. The other thing I'd say is there's a farming area in Tasmania, big scale dairy farming. It's in the northwest where the Van Diemen's Land company started, on the Van Diemen's Land area, and they have dairy herds they've got several dairy herds, and they're all either 900 cows or 1,100 cows they don't have gates. To get away from that, they have their fencing with stringers in the middle that's flexible, and they have the four-wheel, what do you call them, motorbikes, and they've got a frame on the front that they just slowly drive into the fence. It bends down, they drive over it, and then it flips up to where it was because it's got the right tension in it for it. And they do things totally different on this bigger scale. So how they manage the land and rejuvenate it and all that, I don't know. And they've got, I think, a higher rainfall there. You can actually go there for a day, and there's a special way to find out and go in, and you get carted around and shown the place. Quite interesting place, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people need to start researching and then think out of the box to find new ways to farm and the new way to do marketing. Actually, I have an interesting idea many years ago, but never put into practice. I will call it driveway mom and dad shops. The idea is that if we, instead of having a lawn in our front garden or our back garden, we change it into vegetable patches. Then, and we may have a couple of fruit trees in our backyard, for example. Then, for a family, let's say a family of 4, 3 or 4, a fruit tree, when it produces, it will have more than you can eat for a long while. But unfortunately, the fruit tree doesn't produce continuously throughout the year. It only produces in a short period of time, say 1 month and so on. So what if...
This is not new. When I was growing up in the late 40s and the 50s, we were on an ordinary suburban block in Hawthorne. We had, my mother grew various vegetables. We had about 5 fruit trees, and we had chickens in a chicken coop. And we weren't unique. Practically every house in that era was
like that,
somewhat self-sufficient.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we did go to the grocer's shop for many things, but we were somewhat self-sufficient.
yeah.
And
So
we've grown away from that.
yeah, so if we allow ourselves to have a little shop in our driveway, put your excess produce there, and people can come in and say, hey, I have a bed of orange, I want to exchange with your bed of apples. Then you just...
Again, this is not new.
Yeah, that's not new.
In the country, you would have various farmers selling produce on the road outside their farm.
Yeah.
You would buy eggs from one person, you would buy chickens from another person, and so on.
So we can start this movement in our urban area. Most of us will have, of course, those in apartments might not, but most of us who live in a house will have a front garden, a back garden, and then we probably can put in a bit of fruit trees there, a little bit of a veggie patch. I'm a Chinese, I probably will grow the vegetable I like for my family, and you are a Jew, you will grow the fruit you like. But every now and then you can take your bag of your excess, come to my driveway, drop it there and pick some up from mine, etc. Or even if you don't have a garden to exchange, you drop $1 or $2 onto that, and then that will create a little ecosystem around, let's say, a few streets where people just exchange within the local area. For example, my apple tree, my fruit in April, you're in May, and he's in June, then everybody have apples. Instead of I have too much apple in April and no apples in May and June.
But you,
look,
Albert, you bottle them. The preserving.
Preserving comes.
We did that when I was growing up.
Yeah.
We had the chickens and we had
absolutely foul as the cola.
the vegetables. Yeah.
And then you can actually
rid of the
exchange
jars
your
last
bottles
year.
as well, isn't it?
Just got rid of the jars last year, and you make it a family thing. You're all around the table treating the tomatoes or the apricots or the peaches or whatever, pears, and it was just a job.
I hope what I'm going to say is not going to offend the women, and let me preface what I'm about to say by saying that I do approve of women's lib, but one of the reasons that we changed was when women went out and got jobs. Before that, the man was out working and the woman was at home looking for things to do, and that's when they grew the vegetables, planted fruit trees, looked after the chickens, etc. So, look, it's swings and roundabouts, I suppose.
Yeah. We used to preserve eggs.
We're not in those days anymore. Can I go back to something like the Sanhan reforestation and so forth? I think in the thing that I was looking at, it said it's something like 933 square kilometres, and I think as Cyril said, that's just enormous. When we're talking about those sorts of things, what sort of does anyone know what sort of a scale we need to be working at to? I mean, the little micro backyard gardens and ecosystems in our backyards is a great start, but in terms of the bigger, the whole reforestation things, is there a natural scale of these things that it needs to be of a particular size to be able to
sustain itself?
So that it's sustainable?
I don't know, but there are different scales of this thing happening all over the world. Some of the things that happen in China is of a much larger scale, but there are examples of a smaller scale in the rest of the world. In Africa, in Middle East, there's quite a number of areas which have a smaller scale of this, which also make a change. So I think that it should be facile size. That means small will have small systems working and large will have large system working. It all depends on the local conditions as well as the will of the people there. For example, the idea we're talking about in our local area, if I can get our street working as an example, then the street next by may see, hey, they are doing quite well. Why don't we start something like that as well? And then let it propagate.
There's two things I've seen that are a bit novel. One was a place in South Australia near the seawater. So they producing tomatoes is one thing, maybe other things as well. They have a large hothouses. They have solar power, and they distill the seawater for water. And I think they then must have what do you call it, like the soilless thing, the hydroponics, I think.
Yeah.
And they do that, and they had a contract with one of the supermarkets to supply a particular thing constantly for the next 10 years. So it's quite amazing. The other thing I saw, I watched Landline now and again, and there was one of the outback stations in Australia where obviously we can only have a few animals per large land area, and it wasn't working for them. So they got rid of the standard animals and put goats in. And the goats can eat a bigger range of things. They don't have to look after animal husbandry, and they got the goats. I think they were one thing. I think couldn't have been milking them; they were all over the place. But then I think they got the goat meat, and I've eaten goat meat, and it's quite good to eat. I've eaten that in Spain, so yeah. So there's other ways for particular areas that you can't do the standard farming. You can do things differently.
You can go up the road to your local Indian restaurant and get a goat curry.
Yeah.
I love the flavour of goat meat. The only thing that I have against it is it's so bony.
Yeah. Well, it's better for casseroling then, isn't it? Where the meat falls off.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
well, a curry, same thing.
Yeah, curry is same as casserole. Yeah.
Now, Albert, you don't happen to live down our street, because in the front yard there's 3 big garden beds. I'm just having a gamble. It might be your place.
There was one time when I tried to convert my front garden into beds for vegetables.
Yeah.
But since I don't plant, it's my wife's responsibility to plant in my household. She planted all the ornamental plants rather than vegetables.
Yeah.
She like oriental plants more than vegetables. So I think eventually I will take out another few patches and do put in some vegetables there.
Yeah.
But I do keep 2 ducks.
2 ducks? Yeah,
Yeah.
Ducks are good.
Yeah. Ducks is not as good as chicken, but it's better than chicken in other ways. Chickens produce more eggs per year than ducks. Chicken produce about 300 eggs per year, where ducks about 200. So, but the duck's eggs is much better than chicken's egg in terms of flavor. It's a full cream milk versus a skim milk. Duck eggs are full cream, so it's much better.
Yeah, we used to have ducks, and always they were magnificent. Yeah.
Yeah, and
they always have one for Easter, one for Christmas, and other times, any special occasion, there'd always be some ready.
Yeah, and in our council, we are allowed to have 4 birds. So I will be upgrading it to 2 more chickens, 2 chickens and 2 ducks.
That means when they produce young, you have to eat some of them fairly soon then.
I don't kill animal at the moment, so I don't know how to get rid of them and eat them. Somebody had to butcher it for me.
Oh, it's easy. It's easy done.
Any more questions?
Well, yes, we've heard about the Laos Valley and the Sahanba. Are there other projects like that going on in China? Do you know?
Yeah. Now next week I will be talking about farming in the desert. Rice, growing rice in the desert.
Oh.
Wow. But now, growing rice in desert is quite unique in China, because I don't think it can be replicated in the rest of the world. Because rice need quite a lot of water, much more water than normal. And the reason why desert become desert is because it has no water.
Yeah.
Well,
now on that point, Albert, with the Harbour redevelopment, that was desert. And now you've got the forest, but you've got lakes there.
Yeah,
So
and then once you change,
man-made lakes.
no, once you change the microclimate, then you can sustain a lake there. So now, after all, there are still some water falling onto the area. The problem is, if your land is barren, the water immediately flows to the sea. But if your land has vegetation, the water is being held by the vegetation, and then you can sip out slowly.
You're talking about growing rice. Of course, in Australia, one of the big controversies with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority is that the farmers in Queensland and New South Wales are using up too much rain or too much water from the Murray and the Darling for crops such as rice, and it doesn't get down to places like South Australia, which are complaining.
The cotton and rice use a lot of water. We think about cotton and rice.
Yeah.
On that point, I don't think we should be growing them here in Australia. I think that's stupid.
Yeah,
Putting a lot of water into two
Yeah.
crops where if it was used for other farming purposes, it'd go a lot further.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't grow cotton at least. We should instead grow, say, ham. It's much more high yield and use much less water. So it's a matter of choosing the right produce for our country.
Yeah.
I mean, we need some scientists actually do some study and say, okay, Australia, you are not going to grow rice and cotton. You are going to grow this and that, etc. So maximize our value rather than let people dictate. And there's another very interesting thing as well. Aren't we one of the world's largest wool producer?
Yeah.
But we don't control the price of the wool.
Albert.
Yeah?
Albert,
Yes?
you have been talking about there's no in Victoria. There's one very huge distillation plant, which up to now is more than 5 years have not been using it anything. That Murray Darling water are not enough, and all the ship, all the fish dying it. And why not just ask that plant to pass it to somewhere else so they can utilize rather than they just idiots stop all the way for a few years, and the Victoria people have to pay all the tax.
I think that's a government issue. I think we need some intelligence in the government, some scientists really do some research and say this is the study, and then no matter what policy you don't like, nature doesn't obey politics. That's the problem.
Yes, but the plant already built it and supposed to be supply the water, and just let it down and still have to pay for all the maintenance fee. How much of maintenance fee they have to be used? The machine is already have to be running every year, every week at least. Otherwise, the thing will be just become a waste metal only.
I think I agree. I think we need a pretty good thinking in the government, and unfortunately, the government is politicians rather than scientists. So we really need to get some scientists back into our discussions, the people who really know what they are saying, and then let them make the decision rather than let the politicians dictate our lives. At the moment, it's too much politics and not enough science.
Too much lobby groups.
Too much lobby groups in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Albert, China effectively imports water by importing crops that have a high water use when they're short of water, and that's effectively importing it and letting another country who can grow it better than they can with more water, might be Vietnam, might be somewhere else, and that supplements their rice stocks. And
yeah. For example,
they would use for that can go.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. For example, India, Vietnam, they have so much water. They should be growing a lot of rice, whereas for drier region, we should be growing a lot more wheat. So I think different countries need to adapt and then slowly change it to a more sustainable system. Because after all, if human continue to go like that, we are not sustainable. We need to start thinking, how can we change our system to be more sustainable? But
yes,
that's not easy, I know.
and on the higher dry land that usually they're growing the wheat.
Yeah.
And then for the lower land, they have to use and plenty of water or near beside the river area.
Yeah.
They grow a lot of rice.
Yeah.
And for the last year already, there are some other people already grow the rice on the beach.
Yeah.
That is using the
seawater.
That's right.
Seawater rice. Rice should be grown using seawater. So I think that is the great last thing. So maybe next week I will look at growing different plants in desert, converting desert back to a arable land. And then again, if things go on like today, we can have discussion. So I will limit my presentation to no more than half an hour. Okay, and then we will discuss. I think I really enjoy discussing. I don't know how you feel, but I really enjoy more interaction like that instead of just presenting.
Look, it was a terrific discussion, and thanks for those from me personally, those who participated. One final thing, and perhaps we can discuss this next week or the week after. The one thing that I've been waiting for somebody to bring up and nobody did, and that is the bushfires. Now, there's two ways of bringing bushfires into what we've been discussing, both future and past.
Yeah.
Now, in the future, how are the ravaged areas going to cope with producing crops? As far as the past is concerned, the question is, how much did farming in the wrong way contribute to the bushfires?
Yeah, good question. No, actually, I had one idea in mind. I haven't been implemented yet. Is to compare two large bushfire. One fire is about 20 years ago in China, versus the bushfire we just experienced last summer. So Australia, we have a huge bushfire from 2019 to 2020. That was huge. Of course, at that time, they're mainly burning in New South Wales, but the last bushfire was one of those large bushfire. So I want to look at the China's bushfire handling method and compare that with Australia. But I haven't collected the more sufficient information yet. But I plan to do that in maybe a couple of weeks. But next week, my plan is to talk about planting in deserts. Again, on this ecology pathway, talking about ecology, and then we'll talk about how China converted some of the desert into grasslands and eventually becomes profitable for the local people there.
Yes, the Gobi,
the Gobi deserts, the growing of rice in desert and so forth. But Chinese system is very unique in that sense. It is probably not replicable in the other rest of the world, but some of the methods should be replicable. So we will look at that at next week. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Albert.
Thank you.
Email.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Email address. Let me just switch off the. Thank you, Mary. You remind me. Let me just end the live streaming first.